Just like the eyes, the bird plays a very important role.
Its important role?
Yes. To save the bird, she goes through the Jeju Island's heavy rain and heads to the middle of the island, and that's when she talks about it. If I don't go now, the bird will die, so I have no choice but to go. To keep her body, she doesn't eat much and eats little. In-sun adjusts and gives her food, making her faint. After surgery, she worries about the bird. She feels she must protect the fragile bird. Kyung-hwa says she didn't love the parrot much, but can't forget touching its neck alive. Because it's a fragile being that needs to be protected, I have to go. However, Kyung-hwa seems to say that she didn't love the parrot that much, yet she can't forget the feeling of touching its neck when it was alive. And she even draws a bird sitting on the wall with In-sun, showing that there's a certain attachment in their relationship. But it's strange. The sensation of having touched something alive, even though it wasn't burned or hurt, just doesn't fade from her skin. Until then, no living creature I had seen was as light as they were. The sensation of touching something alive lingers. No creature was as light. In Sang-kyung's book, the bird symbolizes the weak. Until then, no living creature I had seen was as light as they were.
In the book by the writer Sang-kyung, bird often represents the weak. Just like the eyes, they have hollow bones to make it easier for them to fly. Are they the kind of beings that seem like they could crumble with just a little mistake? Kyung-hwa struggles so much, pushing through the snow to go save the bird. Please, hold on. I read it with the feeling of wanting it to stay alive. When I went there, with great difficulty, I was greeted by a parrot.
You start to wish so desperately.
I kept reading with the feeling of please stay alive. But in the end, I think I felt really sad because of the scene where she discovers that the bird has died. If I read that part for a moment, something soft touches my fingertips. Nothing feels warm anymore. The only sounds are my breath, which is silent, and the sound of my trembling padded coat sleeves brushing against the wire fence. At that moment, I just knew, oh, it's dead.
Yes, love always comes with pain. Touching the warm parrot sparked love, and saving it through pain strengthened that love. Love and pain are inseparable. When I touched the warm parrot, that sensation actually sparked love, and as I pushed through the pain to save it, that love must have grown even stronger. So, pain is great when you lose something. Also, because the road was painful, you may be able to feel more affection for the other person. So, I feel like love and pain are always connected. Then in part 2, the parrot that was dead comes back to life. It made a squeaking sound, and at first it was a bit creepy, but I thought, thank goodness it's alive.
At first, Kyung-hwa, isn't it true that you go through so much while pushing your way through the crowd? Is it confused, dreaming, or was the initial scene unreal? The story unfolds fantastically, making it ambiguous if it's a dream or reality. Discussing that part, why does Kyung-hwa's journey feel so vivid? It comes out in a way that's really ambiguous, making it hard to tell if it's a dream or reality.
If I just talk a bit about that part, I wonder why Kyung-hwa's journey feels so vivid.
It was so vivid.
My shoes are wet, so my toes feel cold. But as I was thinking about why that is, I also wondered why it feels like a dream. Later on. Of course, the content is like that. But if you look closely, everything Kyung-hwa does or what's happening in part 1 is all in the present tense. So, for example, it says things like waiting, walking, getting off the bus, getting wet, and so on. But usually in novels, I ate, I walked, I saw, right? Since it's in the present tense, we keep following that. So when Kyung-hwa falls, it's not that she fell, but rather that she is falling. That's how we see it. When Kyung-hwa falls, it's not that she fell, but rather that she is falling. This is how we see it. At the beginning of part 2, when In-seon appears, it's presented in a slightly past tense. Just like when recalling the past in part 1, it was presented in the past tense, then In-seon. When we return to the present moment and talk about my mother trying to find my uncle's writings, who had tried to uncover the 4.3 incident, it shifts to the present tense. So we once again follow Kyung-ha's perspective and thoughts very vividly in the present tense.
It seems like all of this is still being described in the present continuous tense.
Yes, I think so. That's right. There are devices make us feel it vividly, but at the same time, yes. It feels like the 4.3 incident hasn't ended yet, and in a way, we still haven't been able to say goodbye. I kind of went off on a tangent there, but while talking about the parrot earlier, I ended up wanting to share something. When I met Ami and Amma, that kind of conversation came up. That parrot has its eyes positioned on the side, so when we look at it, we see it like this. When I look to the side, I see Kyunghwa here, and over here I see the scenery outside the window. And while singing, I just start to sing along. Since it's a parrot, it's singing in a round. And while doing that, Inha is looking at a different scenery with her eyes. It makes me wonder what that feeling is like. Things that shouldn't overlap are overlapping. It's a perspective we can't even imagine. I think these things kind of overlap with the image of Inseon's father that comes out later, even after being in prison for 15 years. I was looking at the beach where I lost my beloved family for 15 years. In reality, while being in prison, I couldn't see that, but I talk about it as if it's just a given. And when my father came back and was absent-minded, my mother told me to bring him some tangerines. And when I gave him some, my father said that he looked at me with one eye and at something beyond with the other. When Inseon's mother was searching for her brother, she thought he must be in those remains, believing he was dead, so she was looking for those bones. But in reality, there was a young man who somehow survived and went to the village. There's a story about a survivor who knocked on a window to get some clothes and escaped. They say there was one survivor. He knocked on the window to get some clothes and escaped. It could be my brother.
That's right.
So now, just a person gets a slight glimmer of hope, but that hope is actually quite a bit of despairing, a tiny pause here and there.
That's right.
From that uncertainty of whether someone is alive or dead, conflicting emotions and thoughts start to arise, and I find that these things keep resonating with me. The parrot, the two places where my father was, and my mother's two hearts. These things that absolutely cannot overlap are coexisting in these ambiguous events. And that's how the mood shifts in part 2. Life and death, reality and dreams.
Is this really real or not, this part? That's right. And in this part, I felt like it was a description of the weak who are still caught in unfortunate situations, with my father being buried in trauma from the pain of the past. Yes, about the reality they are facing. When I see the eyes, I remember things. And even when I hear the sound of the wind, it brings back memories. And Jeju is traditionally known for having a lot of water and wind, right? So it's a place that inevitably evokes those associations. Inseon's mother also, you live right next to an area where there was a massacre, and a nearby village has completely disappeared. Seeing that, it makes me think about how they continue to live there while carrying such trauma. It's like, even though they are alive, the shadow of death is very deeply ingrained, right? I thought about that a lot.
Living while always carrying death within. Yes. It's a bit of a random thought, but while watching this, I kept thinking about quantum mechanics.
Quantum mechanics.
Yes.
In what part?
Like Schrödinger's cat, we can't tell if it's dead or alive, but the moment we observe it, the two superimposed states ultimately collapse into one. But anyway, what quantum mechanics talks about is that it could be a particle or a wave where two states that cannot coexist are actually coexisting. I might have gone a bit too far with this, but I don't know. Two states that cannot coexist. It could be a particle that coexists or a wave. I might have gone a bit too far with this, but I don't know. Writers and artists can draw connections from various things, right? Absolutely. Absolutely. Then I was wondering if these things could also be connected, like the mood in those superimposed situations. I was thinking that those superimposed elements like trauma and pain might be expressed through metaphors like the parrot and various other things. I had those thoughts while reading, just by myself, because it's my own impression. I think I pondered that a bit. There are a lot of discussions about farewells scattered throughout. The title of this book is No Farewell, and there's a scene where water rises in a dream, reaching all the way to the ridge. One of those nightmares keeps recurring, and Kyunghwa expresses it like this. They say that in order to keep living, you have to run away to the very end. And what's the name of the movie project that recreates that dream? So Inseon says that, and Kyunghwa responds by saying there is no farewell. The book doesn't explain everything in detail. For example, Inseon thought the tree would be about the size of a person, but it ended up being over 2 meters tall. Why is that? They didn't answer me. That's right. So when you say there's no farewell, Inseon responds, what do you mean by that? Kyunghwa. Haven't you said goodbye yet? You said goodbye, but is there something you didn't do? There could be some specific reasons behind this. They directly ask, what on earth does this mean? But they don't answer. We can only feel things in our own way, and this is my impression. They're always talking about death, and they're two people who are close to death, but in the end, it's all about enduring and living through the process. Death can be seen as a farewell in some ways, but there are also efforts to not see it that way. Even though family members have died and the victims of the 4.3 incident have passed away, there are times when you can feel their spirits returning. They have returned. So I felt motivated to take on this project. Inseon mentioned some scenes, but it's not easy to say goodbye to family. And the victims either, because they died unjustly. And that didn't solve anything, so we kept looking into it and congratulating them. I don't want to see that hospital poster of the stitched finger scar, but I keep looking. Ami and Amara haven't parted. My uncle returned alone, bled, making me happy because it means no goodbye, and there's hope to save them. Many can't say goodbye, and this is about not giving up. So, I never parted ways with Ami or Amara. And when my mother's youngest sibling came home alone, I was so happy that I put my finger in it and made it bleed. Because there's hope that we might not have to say goodbye and that we can still save them. There are many people who can't say goodbye in various places. It seems like they keep coming up, and this is about not giving up until the very end. It feels more like they can't say goodbye rather than they choose not to. It seems like they're saying that they don't end things and don't say goodbye.
I feel like it's not that they don't say goodbye, rather that they can't. Because there are so many unresolved issues. It was the same during the May 18th incident, and it was the same during the 4.3 incident. There are many people who don't really know what the 4.3 incident was about. So it often feels like even if you want to say goodbye, you just can't. And it was the same during the May 18th incident. There are so many people who feel wronged and don't really understand what the 4.3 incident was about. So it often felt like this became a deep sorrow. I felt like they kept coming to me, returning, and pleading until they were set free.
Those spirits? That's right.
Whether it's in the form of eyes, birds, echoes, or the wind, it feels like they're constantly reminding us not to forget them. When that deep sorrow is truly resolved, people often say that they leave that place, right? It made me feel really sad because it seems like they keep wanting that. It feels like they keep wanting that. I felt a lot of sadness about it. It's the civilians who are in the position to resolve the deep sorrow of those who died unjustly. Since it's the marginalized and the weak who are taking this stance, it seems like foreigners view it quite uniquely. Why is that? In Korea, as Korean culture, K-pop, movies, and dramas are popular. It appears advanced. If you read the works of writer Kang, there are many events in Korea's modern history that are unresolved. Foreigners find it fascinating how we progress without resolving these. Germany, post-World War, held trials to prevent repeating history. Conversely, we progress without addressing history. I think foreigners find it really fascinating to see how we just keep running forward without looking back. In Germany, after World War II, they held trials and worked hard to settle all matters related to the Nazis, to prevent repeating the past. In contrast, in our country, there's a strong feeling that we keep moving forward without properly uncovering the truth or addressing historical issues. I think foreigners might find that quite unique. That's why writer Kang keeps sending the message in her books that we need to be aware of these things. I often think that foreigners might find it quite unique when they see this. So, writer Kang keeps sending the message in her books that we need to be aware of this through books. But it seems like they're being very cautious about defining this as a fact, rather than just saying it one way or another. The way of expressing it?
Oh, way of expressing it. Yes, that's right. I think that's true. So I also felt that they were being a bit cautious. When that incident is turned into a movie or some kind of creative work, they talk about the risks involved, and in the middle of that, there's a scene where Kyunghwa asks Inseon, when she asked if they were going to make a movie out of this story, Inseon immediately denies it. At that moment, Kyunghwa expresses that she knows why, describing the smell of clothes soaked in blood and decaying flesh. The glow of the bones that have rotted for decades will fade away. The nightmares will seep through my fingers. Violence that exceeds limits will be eliminated. In the book I wrote 4 years ago, there were things that were left out, like how soldiers shot at unarmed civilians standing on the street, or how people were brought to the emergency room with faces and bodies covered in blisters and white paint. I feel like there's a constant vigilance here about the things that get omitted, pursued, or removed, so that not everything gets conveyed. So I felt that there was a sense of vigilance and caution here. So, especially with books, I think you really need to read each sentence and the flow of each paragraph to feel the author's thoughts and the various meanings contained within. We talk about our impressions and interpretations of chase scenes on the show, so it's good to sympathize and share opinions. We're definitely cautious about the possibility of miscommunication. When discussing this, there are times when I really struggle with each and every word, so I hope that those watching this broadcast will definitely read the book. I also thought that there might be things we could be omitting. There might be things we're omitting. I had that kind of thought.
As we reach the end, I feel like this expression comes out, and it's like Insun is passing the baton to Kyunghwa, asking her to continue this story. I felt a lot of that sense of create it for me, keep it going. As we mentioned earlier, it feels like we need to keep reminding ourselves and stay aware of these things. Right, I often thought this is in the present continuous tense in parts 2 and 3. There are a lot of Jeju dialects, right? Yes. Because they are records. Yes. So it took me a bit longer to read. I felt the same way. I couldn't understand it. But it's strange you hold it and read it. Then I get the general idea of what this means. Yes, I get that feeling. I found that really fascinating. I think it felt even more vivid because it was in the dialect, right? It felt like the language was coming to life a bit. So it was because I read it out loud. That's right. That's right. Of course, the Jeju dialect is an unintelligible language, but isn't that roughly what it means? So it was conveyed like that. And for example, if I read it to you, please do well. Dialects are really difficult. I'm not from Jeju. If your hair is messy, then your hair looks weird. Like this part, I think it meant something like, I will choose the test boot and the net. While reading, what about you? How do you say it there?
It's like this, but the intonation is like that of Gangwon province.
Oh, really? Yes. But still, it's hard to imagine, right? Yes. While reading, even though there were some words I didn't know, it felt really vivid when I read them out loud.
It felt very immersive, especially in the last scene of The Boy is Coming, when the mother reminisces about her childhood in a Jeolla dialect. It was even more vivid and heartfelt, I think. It's that vivid feeling. It's a bit like when your brother messes with his hair. That's right. That's right. It's the same when I think about that brother. So, now, we talked about how we read the book and shared our thoughts on it. Since this is a subjective impression, I'm actually curious about what others who have read this book think as well. It could be very different or it could be quite similar. It seems like someone who left a lot of comments, so as we wrap up, the author concludes this epilogue by saying that he hopes it was a novel purely about love. As we wrap up, what do you think, Suji?
It's love, the feelings about the missing uncle. Inson, who didn't know that, learns about it as she follows her mother's footsteps. People who seem so weak like that. She has to live on, stained with blood after her brother comes back alive. And that makes her really happy, to the point of feeling joy, even when dealing with dementia. To the point where he would act like that towards his daughter. And Inseon's father has to place a big stone on his chest to breathe. It was so heartbreaking to hold on to the memories of when I used to carry my little brother in my arms. I think it's all love.
It feels like love is gradually expanding, wanting to save the youngest sibling. the love for family, the love for a daughter. It can even embrace the spirits of the victims of the 4.3 incident who suffered the same pain as our mothers. That's why we wanted to do this project. I don't raise them, but the affection for Ami and Amma, in a way, seems like this love is expanding even to living beings. This love keeps expanding, and it feels like it might not have much to do with us. About that past, I feel like after reading this book, you start to develop some affection and love for the people who had a hard time. I want to comfort them. Yes. In a way, it's about humanity on a grand scale.
That's right.
That's right. It feels like the beginning of humanity. So we are experiencing a love that doesn't say goodbye.
It's great. We're in love that doesn't say goodbye.
I can't say goodbye.
That's even more heartbreaking.
Yes. You really feel that there's no goodbye as you read this book. I understood that we can't say goodbye. I think I kept reading the book while thinking, why can't I say goodbye? I understand it now, but there are brief mentions that clarify. On page 44, when Kyung-hwa talks about In Sun, she says this: our actions have purpose. Even if efforts fail, they leave meaning. Her calm strength made me believe all our actions have a purpose. There was a calm strength in her words and gestures that made me believe that even if all my efforts fail, there will still be some meaning left. In Sun said. Anyway, I will keep going. This is page 54. So, when you see something like this, the author keeps discussing the meaning of trying without saying goodbye, and I feel that the idea of holding on to this meaning is another theme that runs throughout the entire book. So, people must ask why it's something so difficult. Why can't we say goodbye? Even if the state can't resolve things, individuals need to move forward and settle things themselves. Why do we keep getting held back? We might be able to do this, but I think we need to believe that each and every action we take has meaning. That's right.
We need to understand and remember the tragedies of history, just like in The Boy Comes. It seems like the author continuously conveys that resonance to us through their works.
Yes, indeed. Once again, I read a book that really resonated with me. It's time for our usual segment within a segment. Reading tips. What reading tip do you have for us today, Suji?
If I may boldly share a reading tip this time, it's about the Reader Survival documentary that featured the Reader Survival enthusiast. I was surprised to find that my subscription payment had gone through without me even realizing it.
You mentioned that you subscribed before.
I'm going to subscribe. Extension. I was planning to just do it for a month and then cancel, but suddenly the payment went through and I thought, oh no. But still, there are a lot of good documentaries. I'm not an official. I did the two-handed reading that appears in Reader Survival, holding a book in each hand. That reading, it's a way to concentrate. Why is that? When we just read a book, our eyes tend to wander to other things as our hands keep moving along the pages. Our concentration gets disrupted, right? For example, if a message comes in on your mobile or something pops up on your computer screen, you can't focus at all. To build concentration, we need to completely eliminate distractions. Source of direction, type it out. To prevent scattered concentration. That's right. Like this, yes. I ended up reading it in 3 days by holding the book with both hands.
So you're bragging about reading quickly, right?
I read it quickly. 3 days is really fast.
Yes, you did a great job. I see. If I can't concentrate, then I'll try to hold the book with both hands. I wanted to talk about how this book was really good for this kind of thing, rather than just giving today's reading tips. I'm currently in a situation where I've quit my job. After quitting my job, I've come to realize the comfort that comes from sensing things. When I talk about sensing, for example, even when I look at this, I notice that there's a sandy area under this cover, and there's water, and a little more. Should I say that I look at it more deeply? And one day, the wind blew, and I tried to feel it more deeply. The wind has gotten a bit colder, sharper, or maybe warmer. In the wind, for example, in spring or summer, in the wind. It feels like I can smell the sunlight, but don't really have to take your time with it. When I was a busy office worker with a pile of tasks in front of me, I was so caught up in what I had to do that I didn't have the time to sense things, look deeply, or think deeply, or think. So when I go to work, I brew coffee, work, have meetings, and I'm constantly doing something. The verbs keep coming up, but in between, you can also take a moment to look at the sky while you're moving, right? Today, as I look around, I see that all the ginkgo leaves have fallen from the branches. I'm looking around like this today. The ginkgo leaves have all fallen from the branches. But now, looking down, I see that the beautiful ginkgo leaves have fallen and turned yellow, and as the wind blows, they scatter all around. I'm just watching that happen. But as I start to sense things like that, I feel like little gaps begin to form between the busy actions and tasks, whether it's sight, sound, touch, or smell. Isn't that what brings a sense of ease to the mind? But the reason I'm mentioning this sound is because of the book. There are various types of books, some focused on the story, and others on diverse characters, and each book has its own strengths and characteristics. But when I read books by author Kang, I feel like I experience a lot more of those sensory feelings while reading, thanks to her descriptions and such. Should I say that we develop the ability to sense things? When we look at works of art, there are times when we can deeply sense and feel the beauty of those pieces. It really gives you that feeling of appreciating beautiful art. So, while this isn't exactly a tip for reading books, I just wanted to add that this was a really good book for nurturing that sense of awareness. I thought maybe, even though you all are busy, it might be nice to take a little time to sense things more.
That's right. The way of expression in Korean is there are many beautiful expressions. I really think it's a book that beautifully captures that. So I highly recommend you read it. Yes, I'll stop here. Have a happy with your book today. Subscriptions and likes are love. This was Jong Soo Jin from Books and Consumption.
This is Lee Jong-un from Books and Consumption. So what about our next book?